Thank you everyone for coming tonight. We're really happy to have you all here for the kickoff town hall for participatory budgeting. So my name is Matt, and before we get started, just an overview of tonight. We're going to go through what is PB. We're going to talk a little bit about how PB will work in Evanston, ARPA project eligibility, equity inclusion, and of course how to get involved. We have a small group here tonight, so if you have any questions, just interrupt. We're just trying to give information that's useful to you, so we can take any questions that you have as they come up. Just to acknowledge how this got started, so there's a participatory budgeting committee, which is a group of council members led by Councilmember Reed, Burns, Nusma, and Mayor Daniel Biss. And then we've got some really amazing staff, including Matt Oren, who's sitting up in the front there, interim city manager David Stoneback, city deputy manager Sarah Flack. Sarah's right there. So Sarah is our expert on ARPA and how things work in the city, making sure that we're spending money the right way. And then we've got a technical assistance team, which includes me, Matt Easterday, and some wonderful grad students, Christine, Gus, and Morgan. And I also want to acknowledge our PB Evanston volunteers back in the corner there. They're going to talk more about what they've been up to and some of the work that they've been doing, but we've got Chris, Grace, Colleen, and Emily. Okay, so what is participatory budgeting? So in short, it's a democratic process where community members decide how to spend part of a public budget. So it gives people real power over real money. Why are we doing it? Well, the city has given $3 million of ARPA funding, so that's for COVID relief, and is letting the cities, the residents decide how to spend it. So we want to spend funds in high-need areas to make an impact. It's to help develop civic leaders in Evanston and build our democratic capacity for future PB and democratic processes in Evanston. PB started in Porto Alegre in Brazil. And it's estimated by some reports, take this with a grain of salt, to spread to about 7,000 places across the globe. In Brazil, it's helped reduce child mortality, alleviate poverty, and reduce corruption. The basic overview is PB is a process that works like this. So a group of steering committee members get together and decide our rule book, so that's the design phase. And then we go out into the community and hold assemblies where we collect ideas about what the public wants to spend money on. Then volunteers from those neighborhood assemblies come and develop proposals and do full projects with the help of the city. And then we all get to vote on that next summer, and then the city will fund those projects. So that's in a nutshell how PB works. So I'll show a quick video about what this looks like.
Participatory budgeting gives people real power over real money to make the decisions that affect their lives. It's a democratic process in which ordinary community members directly decide how to spend some parts of the public budget.
Well, this is different because you're actually voting for where the money is going to be spent instead of allowing them to decide where to spend the money. Who knows better about their community than the people that live in their community?
Not be afraid of the big words, participatory budgeting. It sounds boring, but it's the opposite of that.
So how does it work? First, people brainstorm ideas. They come together in meetings and assemblies and start to think of what kinds of projects they would like to see in their neighborhood.
We have to think big. We have $1 million that we could use, so we can fund parks, health issues, streets.
Volunteers work with experts to turn people's initial ideas into full project proposals.
We started, we made about 40 projects, and so we had a series of budget delegate meetings, and we narrowed down the list into about 4 or 5 projects.
We met with the Parks Department and we talked about what we wanted to see change in some of the parks and how we were going to work with them.
What are the real needs in the community? If you only have a certain amount of money, what is it that you can do that's going to benefit as many people as possible?
Training of new benches, modern benches, seniors have nowhere to go.
Displays at bus shelters throughout the district, and it will tell people when the next bus is due to arrive.
We're asking for a projector and
art fitness center.
Just put solar panels on a firehouse.
After volunteers share the top projects, the community gets ready to vote.
So we're validating every voice in our community and saying, you know what, whatever your position is, you live in our community, you have a right to decide, and that me as a representative and government should respond and should listen to that voice. Anybody can vote in this process, immigrants, whether you're documented or not, and people that normally don't get to vote.
Most people, they don't even know that CEOs can come out here and vote today. Some of them are really surprised. They say, really? I say, yes. They have a voice.
The projects with the most votes get funded.
The Red Hook Library Community Garden. Right here.
The projects are then implemented over the next few years. And the following year, the process starts again. People brainstorm new ideas, turn them into new projects, vote on them, and fund more improvements for their community. PB becomes part of the budget process. It becomes a new way of governing.
I think this is like the greatest wave of democracy coming into the United States. It started in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989.
From there, it spread all over Latin America to over 1,500 cities around the world. In Toronto, public housing tenants have decided to spend millions of dollars on improvements to their buildings. City council members in Chicago, New York, and other cities have engaged thousands of residents in allocating discretionary funds. Entire cities have launched PB, such as in Vallejo, California, for funds from the sales tax, and in Boston for youth funds. Even schools and universities have used PB.
This was a great opportunity for you to be a part of government and better the city you live in. Who wouldn't want to take advantage of that?
We're creating a more educated platform of voters overall. So I think this can only be good for the big project of democracy.
Okay, so how is this going to work in Evanston? So this is approximately the timeline that we're going to go through for PB. So right now we're in the design phase. We just got through the planning. So in the planning phase, the City Council has allocated, like I said, $3 million of ARPA funding for PB. They've set aside money for the PB manager and PB coordinator positions, which are probably going to be hired this August. And also funding for implementation and technical assistance. So the PB process is all set to go, and we're now in the design phase. So we're trying to finish this up like probably by September or so. And the purpose of the design phase is to put together a steering committee of community representatives who are going to write the rule book for how PB will work. So a lot of the decisions about how to work in Evanston haven't been decided yet. That's going to be decided by community members who volunteer to form the steering committee. So we're looking right now for 11 to 16 members of Evanston. So you can be from an organization, an individual. We'll also have a few council members, and council and staff will also be participating in helping design this rule book. Some of the rule book decisions, this is really important that we get a really representative group of steering committee members because they make big decisions about how PB is going to work. They decide what are the goals and principles we're going to work by, how are we going to evaluate this, who's eligible to vote on proposals, what projects within ARPA are going to be eligible, who votes and how, and the timeline. So it's really important if you want to make a good PB process that we get people to sign up for the steering committee. After that, we'll have an idea collection phase for a couple months, so that'll go maybe between like September and December or so. And those will have those community assemblies that you saw in the video. So these will be neighborhood events where people will come, brainstorm ideas, and those will be collected and then go into the next phase of their process. So on average, cities have maybe about 5 of these events or so, and events especially for reaching underrepresented groups, like that can be youth, non-English, just anyone who's having trouble getting to the main events, because this has to be an inclusive process to work. At these idea collection events, they're pretty fun, so you get to come learn about the PB process like we're doing tonight, brainstorm ideas, and then you can sign up to be a budget delegate, which will go into the next phase and develop these into the ballot. So the next part after idea collection is proposal development. So this will happen maybe between December or June or so. And this is where volunteers from the neighborhood assemblies will take all of the ideas from the neighborhood assemblies and turn it into about 14 projects or so that will go onto the ballot. So this is a really important body of work to do. We're probably looking for about 20 to 40 budget delegates or so. And they'll go through a process with a lot of support from the city where they'll review the ideas, they'll prioritize them based on community needs, they'll do some research. The staff under Sarah's supervision will make sure that these are actually fundable, feasible proposals, and then we'll get feedback, and then they'll go up to the final ballot. And now, right before we do the actual voting, there'll be a project expo. So this is where the budget delegates will go out into the community for about a month or so and do science fair style projects. So they'll get to talk to people and just explain what the project is, get a little bit of feedback on it, explain the process to people, just so everyone knows exactly what they're voting on. So most cities do like at least 2 expos. And you know, we're trying to like make sure that people get the word out that when is voting happening, make sure they understand the process and what they're voting on. And then the fun part, probably next summer or so, we all get to vote on which projects to fund. So there'll be a variety of different kind of voting places. So there'll probably be like just traditional, you know, voting booths like you go when you vote for president. There'll be pop-up voting sites, and again, like just to make things accessible, there'll be extra voting places to make sure that we're really reaching everyone. And then a lot of this about the eligibility for voting will be decided by the steering committee. So if there's people that you want to make sure really can find voting accessible, that's an important role for you to sign up for the steering committee. So many cities will say, you know, 14 years or older can vote. In Chicago, and they accept many different kinds of IDs. In New York, anyone can vote without any ID, so that's the kind of decision that the steering committee will be making. And then once that's all done, then the city gets to implement it and we get to see our projects funded. And so that'll happen, you know, roughly in August or fall of next year. Okay? So before we get into ARPA eligibility, I'm going to pause there. Does anyone have any questions about the process and how it's going to work in Evanston?
I have one question.
Yeah.
So say for example, thank you, my name is Dora.
Hello. Okay. So my name is Indona, and I'm just wondering, I do have a nonprofit organization, and I'm seeking to apply. But if you do apply and are accepted on the committee, would that make you ineligible for receiving any of the ARPA funds?
Yeah, that is a great question, and it's kind of a funny answer because that's going to be something decided by the steering committee. So, in general, I think that most cities that we've seen, if you serve on the steering committee, that does not make you ineligible. The final deciders of that will be the council members, so I would definitely check with Councilmember Reed and Burns and Nuzma and Mayor Biss. But typically, you would still be eligible.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
So we're doing this now with ARPA funds, is this kind of a pilot to see how it will work? In other words, if this works out, then would you be doing it with other types of funding down the road? Is that the idea? 3 years from now?
That is a little bit above my pay grade to answer, but what I hope, the reason I'm doing it is because like this is a really exciting model for democracy in general, and I think the understanding on the PB committee is like, you know, this would not be worth doing if this isn't something that we're planning to do in the future. So this definitely is a pilot. Like we got to show up and make sure that it goes well and people are behind it. But the sort of subtext is like, yeah, if this goes well, we're going to do it again. So especially if this is something that you want to see in the future, write your council members in your particular ward and make sure that you are showing up and doing PB.
Thanks.
Okay, let's go into ARPA eligibility. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So in most PB processes, like in our neighbors in Chicago, PB money can only be spent for capital expenditures. So that's like buying a piece of equipment on public land. So one of the really cool things about Evanston's process is we're using ARPA money, which means it can be spent on a really wide variety of uses that are related to COVID recovery. And Sarah, if I say anything wrong, please jump in and correct me. So ARPA is very broad. I've boiled it down thanks to some work by the city staff into 4 categories, just to try to simplify it a bit. So the first kind of broad category is public health. So anything that's related to addressing COVID impacts on public health. That could be mental health, it could be violence interventions, it could be COVID aid to impacted businesses, health expenses, things like that. The next set of sort of impacts are economic on household. And this is a really broad category that I think is going to touch on a lot of things Evanstonians care about. So that can be affordable housing, it could be services to unhoused persons, rent, food, household cash transfers, health insurance, community health workers. It's a really wide variety of things. So anything that's related to helping individuals and households recover from the economic burdens of COVID. There's also a set of economic impacts for business and nonprofits. So this can be things like business incubators, assistance, counseling and planning, micro-business support, aids for tourism and impacted industries, and that includes both private and nonprofit as well. So it's a very, again, wide variety of things that the money could be spent on. There's also economic impacts on the public sector. So this could include both like public services, but also things like learning, health worker benefits, medical facilities, even improving neighborhoods for health and safety. The next big category of things are services for disproportionately impacted communities. So this could be, again, anything for public health, safety, human services, public sector staff rehiring, public service delivery improvement. Human services, I was looking at how the city defines it as basically anything that helps humans. It's a really broad set of things that this money can be spent on. There's also premium pay, so for our frontline workers, like giving them either bonus pay or kind of back pay for, I'm getting the yes from Sarah, to help them recover and keep them well employed. And then there's some kind of particular infrastructure things we can spend on. So water, sewer, and broadband. So that can be clean water, drinking water, internet. So some of the lead service line replacement you may have been seeing around Evanston, that's from this pot of money. So again, it's like a pretty wide variety of things that we can spend money on. So maybe I'll pause there because this is something that people usually have questions about.
I did notice there was one on here where it had two specific topics that were currently being funded.
Oh yeah. Maybe this one?
No, go backwards. Existing Evanston projects. And there's always several slides about existing. Yes. So for those who are currently existing, is that going to be ongoing funding, or it's just that they've already been funded?
Oh yeah, I put this just as like some examples of, so that's another great question. So ARPA is a much bigger pot of money. I think it's 45 million or so. Yes. And 3 million of that's going to participatory budgeting. So that the city council has already spent some money for these other projects. So these are just examples. So we could, in PB, decide to spend it on some more things or totally different. Those are just examples. Yeah.
Is there anything that's like not allowable? Because there's a huge, the amount of things that are like, in the range of possible is big. Is there anything off limits?
Yeah, that's a great question. Maybe I'll look to Sarah to answer that. I asked if I could fund water slides in my backyard, and Sarah said no, so I was kind of bummed about that.
There are not a whole, there are certain categories that I don't think that would be likely to be brought forth in a participatory budgeting process necessarily, but we cannot, for example, use ARPA to replace our property tax revenue, for example. So you can't use it to replace existing. So if everybody were to say, we all just want to have a property tax rebate, that would be a big no. The city couldn't use it to do certain financial things, like to create a reserve fund or things like that. The point that the federal government is giving us this money is to address the needs and address them in the near term. There are, there are always a few things that you can never do with federal money. They have this wonderful category, they have this whole category of things that are expenses that they look at very carefully. And one of the funniest things is entertainment is always ruled out. Now that doesn't mean entertainment, or there can't be a component of things that is used to engage people, but it's like we couldn't go out necessarily and just decide to fund something that had no tie to well, actually, the key thing is everything has to be tied to recovering from COVID or addressing the impact of COVID. And one of the things you have to look at, or Treasury is the agency of the federal government that manages this grant, is they want to see things in proportion to the harm. In other words, if somebody, I'm just making this up, if somebody was out of work for 2 months and we said, everybody who has been out of work for a month or more will get $100,000. Now, nobody's going to do this, but Treasury would be going like, no, bad decision. I mean, we could try it, but we have to report, and they would go, what the heck is going on here? So there's some judgment, obviously. One of the things that's very important in the Act is to, the federal government acknowledges that COVID-19 has had the disparate impact on people and households and businesses that have frequently already been struggling. Lower income people, people of color who don't have access to the same benefits in our society many times, and they want to see priority to address the deeper needs of those people and who have been disparately impacted. So it's kind of a vague answer, but it is a very flexible source of funding. So it's kind of unusual in that way.
Were there particular areas that you were thinking of that you would want to?
No, it was a wide range of things that were permitted, so I was just wondering if there was anything that wasn't.
One other restriction I do want to say is not a restriction, it's just a requirement. All funds must be obligated. In other words, there must be a written, if you're constructing something or installing something or buying something, there's got to be a written agreement for that cost by December 31st, 2024, and all funds must be expended by December 31st, 2026. So, but, that still gives it quite a bit of time to do some really cool stuff to help our community.
And then one thing I'll add on the requirement. So these are the restrictions placed by the federal government on this pot of money. The steering committee might decide to place additional restrictions on it and say, well, why would we want to do that? Well, if the steering committee decides, like, we really need to see funding go to 5th and 8th Ward, that's something that as a group they could decide to do. So this is again a pitch for the steering committee. Like, it's really important, like in that role, deciding that these are going to the high impact areas that really need this funding in Evanston. So this is what's allowed by the federal government, but then we as a group in the city and the steering committee specifically have to decide where's this money best spent. So that's again a pitch for joining up for the steering committee because it's a really important role. Okay. Then I want to say a few things about equity and inclusion. So I'm going to show you some statistics from other PB processes, and before I do that, I want to note that every community is different. So these are from other PB processes in other communities, but these are things that we are particularly paying attention to as we design the outreach and the process in Evanston. There's a lot of different statistics on who participates in PB. So when we look at age, we see that in a lot of PB processes, 18 to 44-year-olds are often the people who participate least in PB. So that sort of guides our outreach. Maybe we need to focus some more attention there. For race and ethnicity, Latinx and Asian residents are often the most underrepresented. In terms of income, this is a weird one. So people who make under 25K and over 100K are both more and less likely to be represented. So in some PB processes, you see overrepresentation at the ends, and some of them you see underrepresentation. For education, it's a pretty consistent trend. So the less education you have, the more likely you are to be represented in PB. And in terms of gender, males, unfortunately, are not showing up for PB as much. So these are guidelines, but the particular groups that we need to do more outreach for in Evanston are going to be particular to our community, and that's again a really important role for the steering committee, that we're making sure that everyone can participate in this process equally.
I'm sorry, is it possible you can go back to the previous slide, which, yes,
Yeah.
may I ask a question?
Please.
Because even though it shows
that the Latinx and Asian are often underrepresented, what about, because I noticed that you have Black or African American, but then what about the subsidiaries within the Black community, such as the African, the Caribbean? They're never represented.
Exactly.
Because it's all lumped into one category, considering that their needs are extremely different, because you're dealing not only with the language barrier, but also immigration matters and cultural differences. So do you have any data that would include also that subcategory?
So these are the general statistics that have been compiled across PB. So we can't fully rely on this. We need to rely on what we know about our community. So that's why the steering committee is really important. We get a really diverse steering committee who knows who is not being reached out to in Evanston.
And this data is from which particular city?
Oh, it's all over.
Across the board?
Yeah, it's these are from 2015. I think I forget the exact number, but it's scores of processes across the U.S.
Okay.
And Sarah, did you want to?
Because I know that in New York City you have a massive Spanish-speaking population. They're the largest immigrant group in New York City.
Yeah.
So that's why I was wondering, because I know that the video that you did was from New York City.
Yes.
And for there not to be representation, I'm like, that can't be.
Yeah. And this also, that brings up another good point of so 18-year-olds are often not represented in political decisions. That's not necessarily saying that 18-year-olds are not represented. It means that the PB processes so far have figured out how to reach those populations. But the PB processes so far haven't done so well there. So there's also a difference between who's underrepresented and who's being reached in PB.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but that's super important. And Sarah.
That's what I wanted to bring up. There's question that the people who are being reached or not being reached by PB are also, one of the things PB is trying to do is engage people who are not generally reached. So in some cases, and it's so much community to community, but I think the key thing is the goal of PB is to get people who aren't generally heard and engaged to be engaged and have their voices heard and be involved in decision making. So that's, you're right, the statistics can be oh, how do I interpret this?
And then also you said that there was the other slide that didn't show of gender. It's my blog right. You're very good.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if that was caught on tape, but that was. Okay. And so, then really another big job of the steering committee is to think through, like, what are the different strategies we're going to use to make sure we are reaching everyone. So some of the ones that have worked in the past are making sure strategic funds, so we're spending money on things that the community needs. And I think the ARPA, like that pot of money is perfect. Making sure that we're getting as many grassroots leaders as possible involved, especially from the beginning on the steering committee. Making sure our events are accessible in different ways. That means like going to where people are at, making sure it's when they have time, making sure those spaces are accessible, which includes a really wide variety of things. And then additionally, targeted outreach. So we're not just doing a general, like, okay, here's the email, show up, but like really going out to specific communities and making sure everyone knows what's going on and can participate. Okay, now the fun part, how to get involved. So I have been subtly pushing the steering committee, but the applications are open now. So the steering committee is going to meet once a month to write the rule book. And then the main other responsibility is organizing idea collection events and voting events in the fall and later in the summer, doing outreaches to your communities. And like I said, the applications are going to be open until August 22nd. And now I'm going to turn it over to Grace, who's going to talk about other ways you can get involved past the steering committee.
Yeah, hi everybody, my name is Grace. I'm a PhD student at Northwestern University and part of the volunteer team for PB. First off, probably the best way we want people to engage and the broadest amount of people can engage with is the voting process. So definitely getting the word out so that community members can vote once all the ideas are collected in summer 2023. And all throughout all these slides, you'll notice that the sign up at pbevanston.org for voting updates and all other forms of updates. People can also submit ideas, so anyone can submit an idea. You don't have to be on the steering committee or one of our budget delegates. So those ideas will be both collected on the digital platform, but also at these neighborhood assemblies. Once again, you can sign up to get those updates. We also need budget delegates, so those are the folks that are going to be helping to develop ideas and turn them into actual projects. And as we saw, there's such a broad range of engagement, so we definitely can get so many different types of people making these ideas, and we'll have people facilitating that process in those small groups focusing on neighborhood engagement. So those will start up in fall 2022. Once again, you can sign up for updates on those events. And you can join our lovely volunteer team. So we need folks that will help us with outreach to communities, helping with these events, so helping the assemblies, as well as supporting the delegates that are helping to develop our proposals into actionable ideas that could be voted on. And finally, we are seeking out community partners who will be able to help us in the idea collection and voting efforts. So please, for wherever you have those organizational connections, those are vital, so that we can really plug into the folks that know Evanston well and can help us source the best ideas for the folks in this city. I think that's everything. Yeah, cool.
Thanks, Grace. And so that's all for the presentation part. We'll do a Q&A for as long as people have questions. And also in the back, if you don't want to do Q&A, we have a pop-up idea collection event. So if you want to submit an idea tonight, you can just go and talk to our volunteers and they will take your idea and tell you how you can get involved. So thank you everyone for coming. It's great to see everyone show up for our PB kickoff event.
So typically, how does the voting work? Like, do you just get to vote for one idea, or?
Yeah, great question. So again, and probably a lot of my answers will be, depends on the steering committee, but different, a very typical way that they do it is they'll give a ballot of like, let's say there's like 14 ideas, and then they'll say, you know, check off 6 that you like. So there'll be like some maximum. Some people have talked about doing like ranked choice voting. There's like a lot of different ways to do it. So that'll be a steering committee decision.
Once the committee is selected, do you guys provide like the material to be able to do the outreach and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. So there'll be a variety of supports throughout the process. So at the steering committee phase for the rule book writing, we've collected like 12 different rule books with like all the different options. So we have kind of choose your own adventure for writing a rule book. So that's for that part. And then for all the events, there'll be like a facilitation guide, like here's how to run it, here's like what you need to do before, here's what you need to do after. We're recruiting these amazing volunteers to help out. So even if like some organizations, they run events every day, but some who, if you're just joining as an individual, like maybe you need some help like to do your event. So we're trying to make sure that like all of the supports are there to do like good events. Okay, thanks so much. Oh, we got one more.
Yeah, so I just want to understand a little bit better. So the voting process, how specific are the amounts of money that get voted on? I mean, are you saying like, 5 cents to this, $10,000 to that? Or is it just, we're going to devote money to X, Y, and Z?
Excellent question. So this is why, so the projects on the ballot are fundable. So they should be feasible. They should have like a very specific dollar amount on the budget, and they will have already been vetted by the city to make sure this project can actually be done once it's voted on. And so that's why the budget delegate phase is really long and important, because that's a lot of work to do that research of like, what does this project look like? It's not just like, spend it on education. It's like, no, spend it on like a community garden at this school in this date with this amount of money. It's really...
They've done the research to figure out what the plans for the community garden are going to cost or whatever.
Exactly. And it's pretty cool because like usually like us as community members don't get that involved in policy making in the city. So it's really neat that like there's a process and supports for us to be able to do that. So it's really exciting.
It's me again.
Keep it coming.
So, say for example, someone submits a request for a specific amount of money, and the budget committee decides that they do want to fund it, but not the amount that they've requested. Will they give them a portion, or will they just completely decline the request because the amount is more than what they believe is necessary?
Yeah, I think, so I'm trying to think when that scenario would come up. So the way it works is that so when you submit an idea at the first phase of that idea brainstorming, those ideas are given as input to the budget delegates. So the budget delegates actually get to decide like which ones of those, based on their understanding of community needs, get advanced. And then they have to turn that into like a very specific project. So the budget delegate would put a number amount, guess like on what they think it is. They would give it to the city, and then the city might, and sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, will say like, this project like either can or can't be funded by that amount, and it either has to like, you have to change the project or you have to increase the amount or decrease the amount. So you wouldn't get into a situation where there's like a project and it gets, and like, yeah, it's like what goes on the ballot, that's what is going to happen. And so the bigger danger would be more like if there's a misestimate in the process later that has to be reconciled. So the staff is going to be looking very closely, like, can we actually do these projects? And that's why in other processes, like in Rogers Park, like that's why they almost always do capital expenditures, because it's really easy to estimate. Like it's like you buy the thing and you're done. Whereas ARPA has programs on it, it's really complicated. So we've tried to suggest, and it'll be up to the steering committee to decide, having a longer time for this proposal development part, because Evanstonians are going to want to do these like really complicated, interesting programs, right? And so that's has to get figured out before it goes on the ballot.
So now I have another question.
Yeah.
So considering that the purpose is to attempt to reach out to the communities that are underserved historically, how can we know for sure that those in power will select those proposals, considering that these are issues oftentimes that have been long-standing but have never been addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it's gonna like be a little bit of like, well, it depends on the steering committee. But let me like break down where the decision points are. So the council members on the PB committee, so council members Burns, Reed, Newsma, Mayor Biss, will decide who goes onto the steering committee from the applicants. And then anyone, so far this is, I don't think I've seen any process that doesn't do it this way. Anyone who signs up to be a budget delegate can be a budget delegate. And then, but there's some more catches. So there's different, the council decides what issue committees there are. So like, you know, does that get parsed into like housing, policing, education, like they'll decide like what those like issue categories are. And then they can also decide how many projects from each committee will be decided. Within that, it's up to the budget delegates to decide. So there's a lot of different like voices in that process, and it's going to get complicated. But you know, what I would keep my eye on is like who's on the steering committee, what are the issue committees, and then making sure that people are signing up to be budget delegates for those issue committees. Yeah, and Sarah. And ideas.
And put in ideas, that is key to getting those ideas into the process.
So it's the issues that we need to make sure how strongly we
Yes.
enforce or representative or put in the mix.
Yeah, if you could do. Yeah, so the point was making sure that there's representation on the issue committees. And then of course, like that's just to get to the ballot, then it's like who turns out to vote, right? So it really matters like that people know when the vote is, that it's easy to get to the vote. So like that's, you know, at the end of the day, like that's gonna be where all these decisions get bottomed out.
Is there a piece about getting the information out once we get to that point of making sure, not necessarily transparency, but visibility and accessibility to the ideas, because that is one of the issues 9 times out of 10 or 11 times out of 10 that people go, I didn't know. We just have this bad habit in Evanston of not knowing. And there's a lot of good ideas that just get not seen and heard.
It's so true. Yeah, so let me, there's where I think that is going to be most important. So, and again, this will be like, again, decided by the steering committee. So the steering committee, so there's going to be these project expos where people are going to share the ideas like with people before the vote. Some cities do this at the same time as the vote. It's probably better to do it before the vote. And those have a couple of purposes. One, like what's being voted on. 2, voting is happening. And then like what the process is. So the steering committee can do things like decide how many of these events are we going to have? Where are these events going to happen? It's going to be up to the budget delegates to like actually go to the events and tell people about these. You know, does this happen online? Does it happen face to face? So like a lot to get the word out is going to happen there. The other part of it is that the steering committee is a working committee, so the people that sign up there are supposed to do outreach. So if we have a diverse committee that reaches a lot of people with a track record of mobilization, then we're going to get better voting results.
Did the idea of maybe in providing last chance venue for some of it, because that might help sometimes?
Absolutely, yeah. So I totally forgot to mention the targeted outreach is part of what the steering committee decides. So like typically what a city might do is like they'll have like, you know, the civic center will have like a week of voting, but in addition, like in New York, they do like pop-up voting like on the subway lines,
Okay.
right? So we got to think about like where.
You can target
Yeah.
the market.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. Parks in the summer.
Absolutely.
So like we've just started, and these are all volunteers, but they just did, they went to the Rogers Park block party a week ago. That was our biggest sign-up event. So 73 people signed up and gave ideas. So like, where are the events that are happening like that are going to reach all the people in Evanston? You don't know yet. Yeah, that's right.
It all starts. I'm sorry, I was like.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good point of like, it starts out good, like, this is really up to the community, right? Like, this is like, so, like, we're gonna show up and do it right, or we're not, you know? So it's really, that's the great, bad thing about this is like, it's up to us. Okay, I will hang out here in case there's any more, but there is a pop-up idea collection. If you've got ideas right now, and we have volunteers waiting to take your ideas, but thanks again for showing up and just calling us.
Sorry, next steps, like what's the next thing after this?
Yeah, next steps is sign up for anything you want to do. So steering committee applications are open. Sign up to pbevanston.org if you want to know like when stuff will happen. So we'll push it out. In addition to the city, we'll also push it out. Look for neighborhood assemblies in the fall. So show up to those. Definitely sign up for being a budget delegate. It's work, but that's where the ideas go on the ballot. And then vote next summer. Yeah.
When does the steering committee application close?
Great question. They are going to start looking, I believe, August 22nd.
Correct. So we won't be closing them necessarily, but they will begin to be reviewed on August 22nd and hopefully be appointed at the September, first September City Council meeting. I can't remember the exact date. September 12th.
Thank you, everyone.